Hi, and welcome to episode 11 or video 11 of the Logistics Technology Decision Making Mind Map. As you guys know by now, making decisions in logistics technology can either be great for one's career or terrible, and the same goes for your company as well. We can sometimes sink millions of dollars into a really bad decision, and we may have spent a couple of $1,000s on a much better one. My name is Marshall Hughes. I've got 25 years of logistics and technology experience, including startups, freight brokering, transport company work. And the goal with this program is that by going through the steps that I've outlined is to ensure that you reduce the risk of making a bad decision and increase the likelihood of making a good decision. So without further ado, let's get into episode 11, which is all about costs. You knew we'd get here eventually. It's really important how much money you're going to spend, but as we've seen through the last videos, really important why you're going to spend as well. So there's three sort of main areas we're going to talk about here. We're going to talk about the setup costs, which is your initial outlay. We're going to talk about the ongoing costs of this decision that you're about to make. And I really want to double back to something we talked on really early is what are the costs not to change? So when you're trying to convince, actually, we might even start with that. When we're trying to convince someone within our organization that we're going to spend a whole bunch of money on this technology, they're going to say, yeah, but surely we can get away with that. And part of the justification you're going to make as a decision maker in the business is to say, you're right, we don't have to spend the money, but this is what it's going to cost us if we don't. So the four key areas not changing is the BAU, business as usual. What is the cost involved in just going as we are? So without the efficiencies that you're going to bring in, without the risk that you're going to reduce, depending on where you're introducing this technology, you could be saving a bunch of money in potentially avoiding legal costs, insurance costs, workplace safety, a whole bunch of other things. Also, when you don't change, how are your suppliers going to treat that? If they're looking to upgrade their capacity and upgrade their technology, and you're not becoming the customer of choice, or you're not maintaining your role as the customer of choice, how is that going to affect your ongoing relationship with that supplier? And at the same token, because we're in a chain, how's the customer going to react? When the customer's then making their decisions about who are those suppliers they're going to deal with, if your technology isn't where it needs to be, and another supplier has technology that is, are you going to lose work? So when you're making a decision about costs, you need to roll these things into the decision because sure, we're going to spend $500,000 over the next 3 years. If we don't spend that money, it could well cost us millions elsewhere. It's always good to be able to do that. You've got to be able to justify it though, but we leave that to the accountants and the MBAs. Next thing we'll talk about is the setup costs. This is where sometimes the technology decision can get a little bit tricky because there's ways of hiding setup costs. We can treat these as ongoing costs. We can treat these as consultants and whatever else. So you've got to be really clear that at some stage you can put up on a spreadsheet, whiteboard, some sort of ERP, this is what it's going to cost us over the next period of X to bring this new technology on board. So a couple of areas you need to look at, in particular external techs, so external consultants and technology and help. So what money you're going to be pushing out of the business to bring people in to help you with this one specific process. And not just external tech for the people, but also for the actual technology you might need to buy. Are we going to have to upgrade hardware? Are we going to have to upgrade software to deal with new hardware? Could be something as simple as do we need new holders for something in the vehicle? From an internal point of view, what are the costs in opportunity cost of saying that these particular people within the business aren't going to be doing what they normally do? They're now going to be working on this new project. So what does that mean? What else is not going to happen because we're making this decision? And people have to be realistic about the fact that if they're doing something they haven't done before, which is setting up this new technology, it's going to take them longer than they think it will, without a doubt, every single time. So make sure that when you're talking to your team members and your staff and your managers, and they're judging what the cost is going to be, that they're being pessimistic about what the cost is going to be. It's going to cost them more than what they think it is. It's going to take longer than what they think it is. Make sure you have that in mind. Another thing you need to roll into setup costs is the downtime. Potentially, to bring on a new technology, whether it be hardware or software, you're going to have to stop doing something else for a period of time. And that downtime might be 5 or 10 minutes, or it might be 5 or 10 weeks, but rolling stoppages over that time. It might mean that you can't run particular processes on a weekend that normally you would. So just looking at that downtime, what it's going to cost you, and maybe how can you keep those costs under control by making a couple of decisions as you go along as well. Talk about data transfer. So especially if you're moving software to a new software platform, sometimes everything goes nice and easily and it's just copy paste and everything's fine. That basically never happens. Usually there is a cost involved in taking data from the old format and translating it into new format. And that cost might be human cost in just data entry, or it might be a technical cost in getting something written that will then translate that software. Vendors, the new vendor can usually help out with that, but invariably, especially if you're making a big tech change, you've already changed your existing platform to an extent, which means that it's not version A of software A, it's version, N3 of software A, so that the no direct translation always exists. Just important to know before you start if it's going to cost you anything and how much it's going to cost you anything. And as I touched on, is the new hardware involved. So that's great. Now we're going to a complete cloud-based system, but we're still on ADSL or dial-up modems. Well, we're going to go and have to buy an NBN modem or whatever else to deal with that. If we're talking about on devices, the devices just might not be up to the task of the new software. And these are changes that you may well have had to make anyway. We talked about scalability and future-proofing previously. Just beware that now these costs are going to get attached to your project if you're the one saying that this is an urgent or this is something we have to do now. So just beware of rolling these costs in. When you're doing cost benefit analysis, take everything in and then maybe allocate some percentages saying, okay, we're 50% responsible for this one. And we'll see what happens. So setup costs, the thing about setup costs is sometimes the vendor may say to you, we're going to pass these costs on, but over a period of time, you've still got to pay them at some stage. Always best to have a clear idea exactly what those costs are. And finally, and probably most expensively, is the ongoing costs. There's always ongoing costs. Very few things of value are free. And even one could argue that free software or free tools cost you elsewhere in the business as well. So let's just look at a couple of quick areas: the license fees, perhaps a subscription model, and talk about hardware as well and what has to go on there. So license fees can come in a whole bunch of different areas. Depending on what the vendor is offering, they'll package things up to make it look attractive for you. Just be really, really clear on what it's actually going to cost you on a monthly or yearly basis to run the software at the volume of transactions or the volume of business that you expect to do. There's some things that you should be able to find in here where there should be some discounts available to you or cost offsets. A couple of areas are rebates, depending on the service level provided, and uptime guarantees. So if you're moving to a cloud system, for example, and they guarantee that there'll be uptime 98% of the time, if they're only available 97% of the time, there may be a cash back or a rebate you can get your hands on there. It's good to know, but don't bank on it. Bank on if the company is offering a really high guarantee, you're not going to get a discount at any stage. SLA rebates can typically be about them not delivering what they said they would deliver at that time. And just be aware that, again, they're really hard to get. And if a company is prepared to offer good SLA rebates and uptime guarantees, they're less likely to use them. On an ongoing basis, though, someone within your organization just needs to be keeping an eye on these things. So that if you don't hit these goals, you need to see a report that says this is how you performed, and then take it from there. License fees, so talk about hidden charges. It's never simple. There's always something else going on. So one area that is usually overlooked is other software dependencies. So it's great that you've installed this new software. That's awesome. Everything's going to work, but it'll only work on Windows 10. And you're currently still working Windows version 8 or 9 or whatever it might be. So now there's a cost to your business in upgrading the computers to Windows 10. You've got to factor that in to what you're doing, because you're going to be held responsible for it. A little bit like what we talked with the new hardware as well. Other hidden charges can be that after a certain honeymoon period, companies may increase their license charges or add additional charges or require additional licenses as you go along. Just beware that after a certain period of time, you're going to have to make a decision whether you want that extra cost or whether you're going to try and waive it, but just build it into your model that says this is over the next 3 or 5 years, this is what we're going to spend. One of the worst ones is the excess data or transactions. Um, Especially in software again, data doesn't actually cost that much for the vendor. Space on cloud servers and everything is almost free, but a real good profitable way for them to increase their bottom line is to say, okay, you can have 10,000 transactions a day, and for every 1,000 transactions over that, we're going to charge you an extra $10. And you think that's not much, but over time that adds up. And remembering this is a little bit like the difference between a large fries and a medium fries. It's basically all profit because there's no cost attached to that additional. So just be aware when you're going into it that you're optimistic about what volumes you're going to be putting through. So if they're saying, listen, we're going to cap it at 100 and you're currently averaging 80, look out for those spikes and expect those spikes to continue. You're looking to spend money on tech because business is great. Let's assume that business is going to continue to be great in the future and just watch for those spikes and either negotiate them out or push them up to a level that is almost unrealistic for you to reach, regardless of how you do. We'll quickly talk about subscription models. So typically you would have heard the term SaaS or software as a service. This is the best way to make money as a software vendor now, is you essentially put all your customers on the drip. So instead of saying you've got to buy this software for $10,000 or $50,000, they'll say, no, that's no drama. We're just going to charge you on a per X basis. The goal being that once they've landed you, your lifetime value for them might be 5 or 7 years. They make a bucket load more money over that time, and it makes their company more valuable as well. So there's different models with the subscription model: pay per week, pay per month. Two of the sort of really common ones you'll see. Sometimes here you might, if you've got the cash flow to handle it, you can actually pay a year in advance and save serious money. You save serious money because they mark up the week and the month so much that it's unrealistic. Usually the first time you're researching software, you might see that this is $9 per X per month. And you think that's great, but there's an asterisk there saying if purchased in advance yearly, whereas the monthly cost might be $20 if you do it monthly. So depending on the cost of the money in your business, it may be worthwhile looking at some longer term incentives and going on a yearly rather than a shorter term. But then obviously there's decisions to be made by the CFO whether you're better off having that cash in the bank or within the business doing something else anyway. Another really common way of charging a subscription is per seat per user. Pretty much means the same thing. Bear in mind that you need to know what the software classes as a seat or a user. So you might think that someone who just makes bookings on a platform doesn't count as a user because they're not really using it. The software company might have a different description of that. So just something to look out for there. And then you need to talk about active versus licensed. So it might be something about simultaneous users or total users. So you might only ever have 5 or 6 people on the platform at once, but you might need to have 50 people who are capable of using the platform. Just need to watch out for what the software company is going to charge you for there. And really it comes down to negotiation, what's best for your company. There are ways, and we could talk about this another time, of having multiple people using the same user or seat. There's ways of doing that. Especially in dispatch, for example, dispatch software, you don't want to have 5,000 users, or at every single dispatch computer, you might just end up having 50 dispatch computers as users. We can talk about that another time. And here's probably on that point is the user level requirements. Be really careful about over-speccing your users. If someone just needs basic access, don't pay for any more than basic access, because if they really need something else done, you can just get someone else to do it. So just be careful of when you've got your tiered access from the software company that you don't put everyone on the gold tier if 90% of your staff can deal with the bronze tier. Maybe just your super users then can be on the gold or the platinum or whichever precious metal they're calling it. Final one to look at for ongoing costs is just the cost of replacing your hardware. If there are going to be lifetime issues, if you're mid-cycle with a current hardware rollout or whatever else, just know that you're going to have to factor that in over the journey, that you're going to need better hardware. And just whatever your business rule is around that, don't pretend you're not going to need it. Even now where laptops and PCs and everything seem to be quite stable, they're probably not. So that's it for the cost one. One more video to go, which will be the summary, and I'll talk to you soon. See ya.